All right, people. Review of the week time. So, oh boy, have we got a lot to talk about. So, let's start with the boxing that happened over the course of the weekend. Let's go over to America for one of the few PBC shows that happened this year. As we said, PBC don't do many shows, so when they do, they tend to go all out in terms of star power, so to speak. You know, they get as many on as they can, and that tends to be kind of the way they do things. They just get as much star power on there as they can, and, you know, hopefully it turns out to be okay. This was a decent card, it has to be said. I've seen some of the knockouts and some of the highlights of it. I've seen the Rhesus Bartholomew versus Frank Martin fight. I'll tell you about that knockout now in a wee sec. But originally this card was meant to be headlined by Janibek Alim Kanuli versus Erislandy Lara. That was going to be a unification of the middleweight world titles. Didn't happen. It didn't happen because it was this week, wasn't it? Janibek Alim Kanuli tested positive for a banned substance. Some people are saying it's meldonium. We don't fully know exactly what it is. I touched on it very briefly on A&G Man this week. I can't look. We need to wait for due process to happen. In fairness, we do have to do that, but it has to be said, right? This is a guy who I believe was hospitalized not so long ago, maybe a year or so ago, for, you know, struggling to basically make weight. And you hear that and you think, okay, well, he's clearly going to have to move up. And then he says, no, I'm going to stick at 160. And you're thinking, well, that doesn't make any sense, because if you're struggling that bad, just move up. I mean, Virgil Ortiz, he learned that lesson the hard way. He had so many fights cancelled, you know, stubbornly trying to stick at a weight that he couldn't do anymore. And he had to go to 154. I might even be going to 160 next, who knows? So I was thinking, he's never going to do it. To then do it and look even better, like, as if that weight's not an issue anymore, I was like, well, damn, there's obviously a reason for that, right? So Erislandy Lara had to fight a short notice replacement, fought Joan Gonzalez, won the fight handily on points, didn't lose a round on one of the scorecards, had the guy down in the first and the last round. That was him. Stephen Fulton, well, he missed weight for this fight. And bear in mind, this is a guy who 2 years ago fought in Niue at Super Bantam. And here he is missing 130 pounds. Fulton was an interesting fighter. He really seemed to, I don't want to say go off the rails. Maybe that's not the right way to say it. But he had that fight against the Niue. And then he had that god-awful performance against Carlos Castro. Was able to get a decent win over Figueroa Jr. or Brandon Figueroa. I think that was the rematch. That was a rematch. And then he does this. He comes in overweight. He loses to Oshaki Foster. Obviously, the interim title with the WBC, you'll find with PBC shows, very WBC heavy. Like, there's the WBC interim titles left, right, and centre on here. And there's 3 of them on here, for God's sakes. Seriously. And people wonder why Terence Crawford didn't want to pay sanctioning fees. And we'll talk about that now later on. But yeah, that's where we stand with that. He missed weight, and yeah, I don't know. I really don't. Frank Martin, Rhesus Bartholomew, knockout of the year. That was one of them anyway. We had a lot of big knockouts this weekend, but that was something else. I mean, if you haven't seen that knockout, go and watch it. Holy crap. Didn't see this fight. Jose Alejandro Ramirez Jr. fought Shane Mosley Jr. Shane Mosley Jr. is no real great shakes. It has to be. He never really has been. He's got better, it has to be said, because if you saw him earlier in his career, he looked awful. He looks a little bit better now, but, you know, that's really saying something, to be honest with you. Then, obviously, Isaac Cruz versus Lamont Roach. Now, I have to say, I woke up this morning to a lot of people very unhappy about this fight. A lot of people feeling that Lamont Roach should have got the nod. Having a look at this fight, I mean, I can't, it's a hard one, right? Because Cruz early on was doing well, and he did legitimately drop Lamont Roach. He caught him with a left hook, I believe. Lamont Roach's glove touchdown. The referee rightly called it a knockdown. And at that point, Roach started to kind of get a bit of a foothold in this fight. You know, Isaac Cruz, as he often does, he didn't obviously decide to, but with the way he fights, he inevitably will slow down. He had a point deducted in round 7. But then he kind of came back into it in the later rounds. And I do believe that, I don't actually see them in front of me. I think maybe Ring Magazine or Ring X account had the copy of the scorecards. But, it was competitive. right? It was a competitive fight. It's a majority draw. It's another draw. It's back-to-back draws for Lamont Roach. Now, I have to say, right, the Tank Davis fight, that was a slam dunk win as far as I'm concerned. Steve Willis, he's normally a good referee. He had a nightmare in that fight when he incorrectly didn't call a knockdown, which was clearly a knockdown. Obviously, a punch didn't go in, but Tank Davis voluntarily took a knee. You need to call that as a knockdown. And had he done that, he would have won this fight. He would have won it on a split, or would he have won it on? Yeah, he would have won it on a split decision. Shouldn't have been, but it should have been a unanimous one. But that one he was unlucky for. This one was closer. You know, it was nip and tuck, this fight. It has to be. The knockdown and the point deduction, it kind of evened it up a bit. But rounds you could score, like to Isaac Cruz, you really could. It was an up in the air type of fight. So that was the PBC show. We get to, I was going to say the UK. It was not in the UK. It was in Monte Carlo in Monaco. It was Eddie Hearn's yearly Monaco show. Now, I have to say, right, having seen the majority of these shows over the years in Monaco, I never really look forward to them. I'm sure to be there in the audience, it must be incredible. It must be phenomenal. Monaco in general must be a phenomenal place to go to. But for me, I've always looked at these shows and thought they lack a bit of energy. I mean, he's done, from the very first one, there's always been decent fights on paper, but they've never really caught fire. And I always kind of figured maybe it was the atmosphere, maybe it was a few things, but this really ripped up the script because we had nothing but good fights on here. Conan Walker versus Pat McCormick. That was a hell of a fight, a hell of a finish in the 12th round. You know, Walker, I've seen a couple of his fights now, it has to be said, right? He lost, when did he lose? Yeah, he lost to Keane Gardner, right? Now, that right there, it's not a good look, in fairness. You know, I mean, it really isn't over 8 rounds, but maybe he just, you know, took his eye off the prize and, you know, maybe he took the L in that fight for that reason, right? Other than that, he's not a bad fighter. He lost to Lewis Crooker, but that fight and that loss has aged pretty well because Lewis Crooker got on to become a world champion, beat Lewis Ritson, all right, got a win over Harry Scarf. I think I remember that fight, actually. I think that was a decent fight, actually, in Nottingham. And then he's been doing his thing. Pat McCormick, I've seen a couple of his fights. I think he turned pro originally, if I'm not mistaken, with Pro Bellum. I could be wrong on that one. But I do remember, maybe it was Pro Bellum, actually, I think he turned pro with originally. And obviously, that kind of went belly up fairly quick. So then he ended up signing with Matchroom. But I've never looked at him and thought, yeah, there's a real serious talent there. He's always looked fairly run-of-the-mill, as has Peter McGrail. But he's looked even worse, it has to be said. You know, the hype he was getting in that, his going into this fight against Shabazz Massoud, the hype he was getting prior to his loss to, I can't remember the guy's name, Jay Quinn or something, that guy's name was the undercard of Sonny Edwards versus Bam Rodriguez. He got knocked out nearly cold in that fight. They were saying that, what was he, the Liverpool Lomachenko and stuff like that. And, you know, all this hype you tend to get with Eddie Hearn fighters, they love to put asterisks. They love to get, like, you know, an old fighter, you know, a great fighter in some cases, and, you know, slap them alongside them. You know, they were calling Sam Eggett, what was it, the Birmingham Carl Froch? Who did they call as something Golovkin? They're always sticking these names on these guys, and they're never as good. And I always find that that's almost like a curse, because once you start putting those names on, they end up losing. And yeah, Peter McGrail never impressed me. Shabazz Massoud, Eddie Hearn was mentioning Inoue and Stoke. I hope he doesn't want to try and get Shabazz Massoud knocked out. And at the end of the day, it's not going to happen anytime soon, because Inoue, as we believe, is, well, provided he wins, obviously in the next couple of weeks, but he could be facing Yunto Nakatane May of next year in Tokyo. So I think he's got bigger fish to fry, to be honest with you. Beatrice Farah, Elf Noor Tora, I think is how you say that lady's name. She is a Turkish fighter. She is ferocious, to say the least, because Beatrice Farah, I'd seen a couple of her fights. I can't say anything really jumped out at me about her in terms of, you know, necessarily big talent. I thought her against Dubois, Caroline Dubois, obviously, who I believe is now signed with MVP. I felt that Caroline Dubois would have the beating of her. Damn, that girl, Ellis Toran, she is, you don't see that. And you don't see punching power like that in female fights either. She was vicious. I didn't see Sean McComb versus Hugo Metcalf, or Miakaf, I think is how you say his name. But I do know McComb pretty much beat him soundly. I saw a couple of clips of the knockdowns. Sean McComb had a really He had a really, I was going to call it worrying fight against Gavin Gwynn, where he just checked out mentally in that fight and just was like, no mas. But since then, he's been doing really well. And he's been looking really well. He's been getting good wins. He should have beat Arnold Barbosa Jr., who we all saw what he did to Jack Cattrall. So for me, looking at, what Sean McComb has been doing, I mean, I think he calls himself the public nuisance. I mean, he's proven to be just that. And then finally, we get to Johnny Fisher versus Ivan Balaz. Now, again, I've already done a post-fight review of this. I don't need to labour the point, but Johnny Fisher, I mean, at this stage now, I think someone commented, was it on the video I did, the post-fight review, where they basically said that it's pretty damning when you think that Jarell Pataya doesn't get as much praise as someone like a Johnny Fisher, or certainly Eddie Hearn is more willing to hype Johnny Fisher. And yeah, it is, because Johnny Fisher is a gimmick. That's all he's ever been. I remember when he turned pro, I was like, okay, why? And the weird thing is, right, when he turned pro, they didn't sell him as this kind of, elite amateur or GB standout, because that was kind of Eddie Hearn's thing. He'd always sign a lot of the GB guys. Back then, he didn't have much competition. But this kind of run-of-the-mill guy just came about, and the guy's dad, who's, the big Chinese bosh guy, and I was thinking, okay, maybe he can fight, who knows? And you're looking at him, you're like, okay, there's no talent there. You're like, this doesn't make sense. And then it does make sense because, he's a ticket seller, he's a gimmick and stuff like that. But I think that, I think, yes, he is a gimmick, but there are gimmick fighters who can go certain places, they can get to a certain level. Johnny Fisher can't even get to that. I mean, again, God loves a trier, and I respect the fact that he's willing to try and improve. He left Mark Tibbs, who is a good trainer, actually. Mark Tibbs, a very good trainer. Went to Tony Sims. He's trying to improve things. He's trying to be the best he can be with the limited ability he has. But that's the problem. It's just so limited. There's nothing you can really do. I mean, he's fighting a fairly obscure opponent here. And he almost got chinned again. He was hurt a couple of times in there. He fought a very dirty fight, it has to be said. I mean, let's just play devil's advocate here, right? Johnny Fisher is ranked 82 in the world on BoxRec, all right? And if you just look at some of the guys, like there's Victor Vickhurst, there's Tara Moana. These are not even in the top 50. They would soundly, Jerry Forrest would have a field day with Johnny Fisher. Pero, maybe even the Senad Gashi at this stage. I mean, these are guys not even in the top 50 on BoxRec. Heaven forbid you want to look at someone in the top 50. Tony Yoka at this stage in his career, Joe Joyce, people like that, Otto Vallian. These guys would genuinely, they'd have a field day with the guy. They would absolutely have a field day with this guy. They really, truly would. And they really, truly would. So, look, with all due respect to Johnny Fisher, I get what he's trying to do. And God does love a trier, but you're a heavyweight. I'm thinking of the kid's long-term health. That's what I'm thinking, because he's clearly getting hurt. He's clearly not got the defense. He's clearly not got the chin. At some point, he's going to end up getting seriously hurt. And I've seen someone say as well that they think Johnny Fisher is David Price 2.0. That's so disrespectful to David Price. David Price, just for those who don't know, David Price, 6 years ago, in his penultimate fight, because he fought Derek Chisora and then retired, in his penultimate fight as a professional, beat the living crap. Didn't lose a round. Didn't look in remote trouble against Dave Allen. Gave him Dave Allen's had some beatings. One of the worst beatings of his career. All right? And that guy, David Price, is being... No, I won't have that. Bear in mind, 6 years later, Dave Allen, who's still knocking around, right? He's not as good as he was, and he was in better shape when he fought David Price. Goes in there and absolutely steamrolls Johnny Fisher. So that kind of puts it in context to what we're dealing with this kid. He just doesn't have it. And I say that as someone who doesn't want to see the kid get seriously hurt, right? Misfits is the only thing for him. And I don't think there's any real shame in that. People like Vidal Riley, who look like they're going to go into Misfits, who their ceiling's a lot higher than Johnny Fisher. Tommy Fury, who, coming from a boxing family, that seems to be the route he's going down. John Fury feels right at home in Misfits, and Tommy Fury is able to make money from it. So I think for Johnny Fisher, that's the route to go. Maybe work with Tony Sims, see what you can do, and then maybe, in a couple of years, because he's still quite young, go and see if you've improved enough to maybe try and win a British title. But for now, I mean, like, if they match him even against the wrong journeyman, Like I mentioned Doboshenko. Could you imagine Kamil Sakalovsky, a peak Kamil Sakalovsky against Johnny Fisher? Johnny Fisher getting knocked out by Kamil Sakalovsky, because Kamil Sakalovsky could punch. All right, Johnny Fisher getting knocked out by him. That's the level we're at. No. So that's my thoughts on those. Speaking of heavyweights, Tyson Fury hints at return from retirement. The king must return to the throne. When is Usyk fighting again? Because they're saying the king must return to the throne. Yeah, when is Usyk fighting again? Is he going to try and be 3-time undisputed? Because I'm assuming that's what you mean. Wink, wink. Tyson Fury has hinted that he may come out of retirement and make a return to the ring. With a post on social media, he said the king must return to his throne. It's the second time Fury has retired, calling it a day back in 2022 before retiring. I'm wondering, whoever wrote this, was he a fan of Tyson Fury? Because I believe that it's not his second. Oh, he has had many retirements. So to say this is only his second is a little bit disingenuous, but it is Sky at the end of the day, so what do you expect? Tyson Fury has hinted that his retirement from boxing could end nearly a year after declaring the king must return to his throne. Fury had insisted that his boxing career was over in January after his second consecutive defeat to Alexander Usyk in an undisputed, it wasn't undisputed, it was a unification. Well, it was technically, it wasn't a unification because Usyk had 3 of the 4 belts, so you got that bit wrong. Heavyweight world title fight in December, but the 37-year-old has teased a comeback on social media. Okay, there is a long and lonely road that only I can walk, but after the long hard battles awaits immortality. Fury's promotional team Queensberry have posted the same quote with an image of Fury sat on the throne. It is not that yet. We know all about that. They're on about this, that, and the other. What else do we have? Okay, speaking in October, Hearn revealed that Joshua was in talks with Turki Al-Sheikh, chairman of General Entertainment Authorities in Saudi Arabia, but a multi-fight deal that could have a Fury fight in it. I believe Fury is a competitor and the fight is on the plate for him, Hearn told Sky Sports. So there's no excuse. The only excuse is I just don't want to do it anymore. And that's absolutely valid. He's done everything in the sport. Yeah, there we go. We have that. So that's really it. So it's just mainly Tyson Fury hinting at a comeback, which he's done that before. He's done it before this year. He's been in the gym with Sugar Hill Stewart saying, you know what time it is, this, that, and the other. So it's nothing new for Tyson Fury. He tends to do these things as well when an opponent has a big fight coming up. So I believe it was was it the run-up to... Well, put it like this, right? So when it was the kickoff press conference for the last Crescendo, that's when he announced he was retiring. I think it was Ben Eubank, or it was certainly a big event, Ben Eubank 1, where he started doing all those videos of him with Sugar Hill, this, that, and the other. I think he did something else as well in the run-up to the Dubois-Usyk fight. So he tends to do this, and obviously AJ is fighting Jake Paul in a couple of weeks. So I think he tends to do these sort of things, you know, when... He wants to kind of gate crash the party. Listen, I've no doubt Fury will come back next year. I've no doubt. And the thing you need to remember is, right, some people are saying, well, maybe Fury is waiting for all those contenders to, you know, like the Usyks, the Joshuas and stuff like that, to take punishment, this, that, and the other, so he can swoop in. Well, one, he's 37 years old, he's not getting any younger. And two, it's not like Fury is ticking over in the gym, staying in shape. Well, we've seen some of the pictures of Tyson Fury, you know, on holiday and stuff like that. He is looking heavy. So... he might think he's being smart by, you know, I'm avoiding any hard sparring or anything like that. Yeah, but you're avoiding, you know, keeping in shape, which that helps too. So let's look at some boxing news. Now, this is an interesting one, and this doesn't surprise me in the slightest. Miller in talks with Matchroom. Spencer Brown has said that there are ongoing talks between Eddie Hearn, Matchroom Boxing, and heavyweight contender Jarell Miller. Says, we are pretty sure we've got a fight for Jarell. I think he's looking at working with Eddie. Miller faced off with Linaire Pero, last month in Orlando. Yeah. Now, that wouldn't surprise me because Eddie Hearn, we already know, is a hypocrite, a massive hypocrite when it comes to drug cheats in boxing. We know that. Eddie Hearn has said that in the past that, you know, drug cheats should be banned, that he wouldn't work with a drug cheat. Well, he's worked with Jarell Miller before, and obviously he was very vocal when Jarell Miller failed in the run to the Joshua fight. Would never happened. He was vocal again when he failed a year later, and here he is potentially working with him again. Povetkin failed, you know, well, his whole career, but at the time when he signed with Eddie Hearn, he'd failed 2. Obviously Canelo, Conor Ben, you know, We need a clean sport as long as it's not one of my fighters, Dylan White, etc., etc., etc. So again, at the end of the day, right, if you're a promoter and you want to work with Jarell Miller, I can see why you'd want that, to be honest with you, because he is a ticket seller. He will, put eyes on the event. So I don't get that from a promotional point of view. I really can't begrudge any promoter really wanting to work with him in that regard, because he's exciting. He's a larger-than-life character. In many ways, he's huge. But to be, to go on that whole, moral high horse, that's why I don't like virtue signaling, because it's never genuine. It's always disingenuous. It's these people who go around and say, drug cheats should be banned for life and this, that, and the other. It's like, okay, but what happens when you know the person, or what happens if you're a promoter as one of yours? Oh, well, then your tune changes. So then you don't believe what you're saying. So that's why it's just me virtue signaling. For me, it's just nah. Teofimo Lopez Shakur Stevenson was announced this week. The first press conference is actually going to be on Wednesday in New York City. I love this fight. I think it's going to be epic. I think it's going to be good fun. January is shaping up to be a flipping massive month in terms of boxing. There's going to be absolutely loads on. I'm wondering could be getting an announcement on this fight as well. So apparently Callum Smith versus Dave Morrell have now reached a deal. It's been going on a while, but there has been a deal reached. That has me wondering now, is that maybe going to be on the undercard? I'd love it if it was. That'd be absolutely incredible. I'd love it. Absolutely love it if it be on the undercard. So let's wait and see. I think that's a cracking fight. I'd probably make Callum Smith favourite now that I think about it, because Callum Smith still has something. We know that. We saw that in the Boazzi fight. Morrell, I don't know. I really don't know. Terence Crawford's been stripped of his WBC title. He's been stripped of his WBC Super Middleweight World title for not paying sanctioning fees for his last two bouts. I can't blame him, because the WBC have been making announcements on fights all week. I mean, they've named Conor Benn mandatory without having fought at welterweight in 4 years, beaten up, shot to bits, weight drained, and probably ill Chris Eubank Jr., and that's given him a mandatory shot at the winner of Garcia versus Barrios. That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever. Joshua Boazzi, Ben Whittaker being ordered. Again, what the hell has either guy done? One of them is coming off the back of a barely a win and a loss. The other guy is coming off the back of a win over Liam Cameron and a win over a completely obscure opponent. What was the guy's name? Benjamin Gavazzi? So how you can justify those two being ordered for an eliminator, I've got no idea. I really don't. A Coley versus a Tauma has also been ordered. Again, that just doesn't make any logical sense to me whatsoever. It just seems these rankings with the WBC are just absolutely ridiculous. They don't make any logical sense. And I don't begrudge Terence Crawford not paying the fees. At the end of the day, right, I don't know how these sanctioned bodies make money. They maybe have backers. They maybe have people who are putting money in behind this. I don't know, right? Because it can't just be all from sanction fees, right? Sure, it's going to help, but it can't be all that. And for Terence Crawford, right, I don't begrudge him not paying them, especially if some people are saying that they're looking for more money than the other sanctioning bodies. And, Sullivan is an example. Sullivan is someone who, I remember, right, and this is a perfect example, right, because I talk about virtue signaling with Eddie Hearn. This is a perfect example, right, of just someone not getting it, right? So do you remember when, I don't know if they announced this or if it was just a little side piece. So when they did the Matchroom versus Queensberry 5v5, right, I was at that press conference. It was in Tottenham Court Road over here in London, right? And Sullivan was there, and I think he had the undisputed title, or it was a title anyway that he was going to give to the winner, right? And he said that because both guys are Christians, right? Although I'm not sure if Tyson Fury is a Catholic or if he is, Church of England. I'm not sure about that. But Oleksandr Usyk is obviously an Eastern Orthodox. I think he's from the Ukrainian end of the Eastern Orthodox Church. So they don't follow the Catholic Church, that they're not Catholics, right? Which is fair enough, right? To each his own, right? I don't care what religion you are, to each his own. You do what you got to do, right? But Sullivan just comes out and goes, well, so I've got this signed by, at the time, Pope Francis. And you're just like, that might actually be seen, certainly with Usyk, as maybe a little bit disrespectful, because he wouldn't follow Pope Francis. It wouldn't be, they wouldn't follow the Pope because they're not Catholics. But again, to someone like Sullivan, it goes over his head, completely over his head. So yeah, I don't begrudge Terence Crawford not paying sanctioning fees to the WBC. I think Sullivan's an absolute joke. I really do. I think he's a complete fool. I think he's a joke. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, right, when people say, well, he did a lot of good, he's done a lot of good for, you know, fighters and this, that, and the other who've retired and stuff like that. He's trying to clean the sport up. Well, trying, but, you know, not succeeding because fighters are still getting popped and he's giving some of them a pass and some of them not. At the end of the day, there are so many people out there who do things for charity but are not good people. Does that, like, I mean, I'm not saying this is Sullivan, but there was a certain presenter, you know, he's dead now, you know who I'm referring to, who charity. Was he a good person? And again, I'm not saying that's Sullivan, but you see what I mean? When people say these things like, oh, but he does it, Conor McGregor, people are always saying back home, oh, but he does a lot of good work. He's still a scumbag. So, okay, brilliant. You do a lot of work for charity, you're still a scumbag. It's not going to change you, you know. It just doesn't change things because you do one good thing and then that's going to, you know, knock off all the other bad stuff. It doesn't work like that. So, yeah, those are my thoughts. Bit ranty, isn't it? But those are my thoughts on everything there. I think that's pretty much it. I think we've covered most of it because I don't want this video to go on, like, way too long. I think it's already over 20 minutes now as it is. Let me know in the comments section below your thoughts on everything. I hope we all have a great week this week. I was going to say weekend, but the weekend is gone. That's why we're doing review of the week. I hope you all have a great weekend, or week. We just did it again. Week. Smash the like button if you could. Hit subscribe, of course, as always, if you haven't already. And until next time, people, I'll leave it there. Peace.